Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Overmars, and I work with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. It's my pleasure to welcome you to one of several sessions taking place during Nova Scotia Human Rights Week. Since 2023, communities throughout the province have been invited to join in this week-long celebration of human rights from December the 3rd to the 10th. Presented by the Human Rights Commission in partnership with human rights champions, community organizations, and government, the week's events highlight the foundational role that human rights play in protecting each person's right to live free from discrimination and the powerful force of a collective effort. The topic of today's presentation is accommodations at work and will help us understand how to create more inclusive workplaces through effective accommodations. We'll learn what workplace accommodations are and why they matter under Nova Scotia's Human Rights and Accessibility Acts. We'll look at common barriers, share examples of practical accommodations, and explore the key steps in the accommodations process. There will also be time for questions and real world examples to bring the process to life. Before I pass the mic over to Corey Melanson from Sea Change Collab, I'd like to share that with deep respect for the Mi'kmaq people, the Commission acknowledges that we are located in Chibuktuk, on the unceded and traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This land is covered by the sacred peace and friendship treaties signed with the British Crown in the early 1700s. We honor the profound historical and spiritual connections of the Mi'kmaq people to this land, where their ancestors' legacies endure. As treaty people, we are bound by the promises made in these treaties, guiding us in mutual respect and reconciliation. We commit to working together in harmony with respect for the Mi'kmaq people, their culture, and their rights. Again, thanks to all the folks that are tuning in throughout the province. Registration has been really great for the events this week. I encourage you to check out the rest of the calendar. But in the meantime, really excited to pass it over to Corey. It's always a pleasure to get to work with you, Corey, and you're in good hands, folks, for the next 90 minutes. Thanks, Corey. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Really appreciate all the work that the Human Rights Commission has done around this incredible series of workshops and events this week. So, as Jeff said, today we're focused on accommodations at work, and my name is Corey Melanson. I use the pronoun she, they. I identify as a white, queer, neurodivergent settler. There's also lots of other things about me, but I like to describe at least a few of my both dominant and more marginalized social identities. I have shoulder length hair and pulled partly up, brown hair, glasses, and a green sweater today. And that's just considered by some to be an accessibility best practice for folks with low vision to be able to kind of visualize what speakers and others look like. So, as Jeff said, this is a webinar style. So I was saying to Jeff earlier, oh, I'm used to much more interactive presentations. So we would encourage you to use the chat, and I will be asking some questions kind of throughout the presentation just to get a sense of, how you're reflecting on some of the materials. So the work that I do is through a project called Accessibility Confident Employers, or ACE, and I'll share a little bit more about that closer to the end of the webinar. But ACE is a project of Sea Change Collab, and the ACE project is funded both by the federal government and the province of Nova Scotia. So I want to just dive right into why accommodation. Why is this such an important topic? And it's also just to say it's so wonderful to see a large number of people turn out for this workshop. And I guess we want to start with kind of first voice representation. So a guiding principle of the ACE work is nothing about us without us, which means that people who identify as deaf, neurodivergent, and or with a disability are always involved in the co-creation of our training and awareness work. And the ACE project really is about training and awareness. So we've developed over the last multiple years a suite of trainings for employers across Nova Scotia that are offered free and in multiple formats, both on demand, through monthly skill builders, etc. And so part of this first voice representation is that we often will include first voice videos in our training. I bring one perspective as a person who's neurodivergent. I also have anxiety and depression, and I'm still in recovery from a brain injury. So I bring one lens on disability. And we can't bring, of course, every lens or every perspective or lived experience into everything we do, but we can certainly broaden that to ensure there's more intersectional perspectives. So I want to play this short video that introduces you to three people who we'll hear from kind of throughout this training today. Clary, Andrew, and Sheila.
Hi, folks. My name is Clary Chambers. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a Black queer woman. I live with invisible illness and invisible disability. And in that invisible disability, I am dyslexic, and I also have ADHD. So the way that I interact with the world is a little bit different. But one thing about me, if you are be able to see me that you may not know, is that these things are invisible. So they're different than looking at somebody. I appear to be able-bodied in that I can interact with the world in a way that folks may not assume that there's any disability that I have, but I do have that invisible illness and invisible disability.
My name is Andrew Jansen. I use he and they pronouns. I am masculine presenting. I have a beard, glasses, and I wear a shoulder brace. And I'm queer. I am disabled. I'm chronically ill, and I also use personal support workers and a power wheelchair in my day to day.
Okay, my name is Sheila Johnson. I'm Indigenous. I'm from Millbrook First Nation. And what else about me? I guess that's it. Well, I work in home care. I'm a healthcare provider. Yeah. Okay, well, I am who I am. I've got brown hair and I'm Indigenous.
Great. So that just really introduces a couple of people again with a range of disabilities and intersectional identities. So we come back to this question of why accommodation, and I'm sure as many of you know, there are 2 in 5 people in Nova Scotia who have a disability, Nova Scotians. Some disabilities are visible, certainly others are not. We know that disability can affect anyone at any age. More people become disabled every year. So even the 2 in 5 is based on statistics from 2022. And the Canadian Disability Survey on Disability will be updated in 2027. So there's an assumption that those rates of disability will continue to increase. Certainly, a person's race, culture, gender, age, income, and other identities affect how they take part in the world while living with a disability. So this really brings in that intersectional perspective, as we'll hear again more from the first voice speakers as well. So one of the whys is because Nova Scotia has the highest rates of disability in the country. Another why is because we have legislative frameworks. So the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act really prohibits actions that discriminate against people based on a protected characteristic in combination with a prohibited area. So this includes physical and mental disability, which is the characteristic, in combination with employment, housing, services and facilities, et cetera, et cetera. In addition, in Nova Scotia, we have the Nova Scotia Accessibility Act, and in 2017, Nova Scotia passed the Act respecting accessibility in Nova Scotia. And this aims, as we know, to make Nova Scotia inclusive and barrier-free by 2030 and includes 6 accessibility standard areas that are currently, well, one is enacted. The built environment standard was enacted this year in 2025. And the other 5, education, employment, goods and services, information and communication, and transportation, are all in development. And so by 2030, the goal is for them all to be enacted. Under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, there is a duty to accommodate, and that is all about removing discriminatory barriers under an employee's or even a candidate's, ensuring that the employees or candidates' full participation in the workplace. So even before someone is hired, when they are a candidate, they are employers in Nova Scotia need to accommodate. The idea that we really try to talk about through the ACE project is that managers and employers and leaders really should take a proactive approach to accommodation that supports really timely decisions and appropriate supports. So that's what I want to introduce next, is the idea of accessibility as a continuum. And I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with this definition. Accessibility is really when our environments, services, products, and policies are proactively designed and constructed so that people with a disability can fully and equally participate without experiencing barriers. So if we take that as exactly what we're trying to achieve, we think about accessibility along a continuum from proactive to more responsive. So proactive really is kind of that definition of accessibility, creating safer, more inclusive workplaces for everyone, and anyone with a disability can fully engage. When we're embedding accessibility considerations and representation, so this idea of nothing about us without us from the start, this is still very much on that proactive side. So for example, the Accessibility Directorate, as they've been developing even the Accessibility Act, it was the first act in the province of Nova Scotia that included community engagement and community consultation. So that really embedding those considerations and that first voice from the start was a very proactive approach. Proactively addressing barriers. So even before someone brings them up, noticing them in your workplace or noticing them in areas and then saying, oh, we really need to ensure this is the case. For example, we have American Sign Language interpreters here. I'm not sure, Jeff, you can correct me, but I'm assuming that you've booked American ASL interpreters for all of your sessions,
Yeah.
which just means that you've proactively addressed a barrier to someone who is deaf or hard of hearing. So that's, again, this is really on the proactive side. Addressing barriers as they arise, this is then noticing, oh, this person, for example, uses a screen reader. Oh, oops, I just sent an image of a document or an inaccessible document. Oh, I better go back and redo this and make a more accessible PDF that can be read by screen readers. So addressing these things as they come up. And of course, the last one on this responsive side is adjusting environments, services, and products to be able to be used by someone with a disability. And this is actually the government definition of an accommodation. So when you really have to adjust something and you're responding to that, that's really an example. Now, I gave some examples here, if you remember, from proactive to reactive. I'm going to give you a minute. And if you want to put it in the chat, that would be great. Just have you seen examples? Have you witnessed examples in your workplace, in your communities of a proactive, um, proactive accessibility or more responsive accessibility? So I'll just give folks a minute. This is where I like to have a little bit of a dialogue as much as we can. Some examples of accessibility in your workplace, in your community. They don't have to be big examples, they can be small ones. Yeah, great one. Someone just put ramps and entrances to stores. So we often think of accessibility as physical accessibility. All right, I'll keep moving. Oh, there we go. Proactive booking a facility that had overnight wheelchair accommodations. Absolutely. Installing AEDs throughout our facilities that are wheelchair accessible. Now I need to know what an AED is. And forgive me if this is
I-
something I should
I'm
know.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say something like automatic entrance devices or something like door openers. I'm just guessing.
Okay, perfect. Um, someone says we've been buying reader pens for apprentices. So of course, this is the challenge is now I want to know a lot more about all of these things. But yeah, so these are all some really great examples of, especially in this case, some proactive, probably some responsive. Um, AED. If someone has a heart attack symptoms, the AED is its prevention of it. Thank you so much, Holly.
I was way wrong, Corey.
But automatic door openers too, Jeff. That's ADO. No. So these are great examples of where people are noticing accessibility in your communities, in your workplaces. Keep putting them in. I continue to see them. So I gave some examples when I kind of went through this the first time. But this again is kind of okay, really proactive is using universal design, both universal design for kind of buildings, but also universal design for learning, UDL. Psychological safety, and we now have both federal and provincial legislation around psychological safety, as well as equity and inclusion principles and approaches. So kind of combining all of those things creates that safer, more inclusive workplace and space for everyone. Really looking at accessible recruitment and hiring and norms and policies that allow for flexibility. Um, what we know is that flexibility is one of those accommodations or accessibility practices that really uh, meets the needs of a range of people with disabilities. When we can proactively address barriers through things like mentorship, technology, training, physical structures, these are still in that proactive sphere, right? So we're saying, we know that everyone needs a baseline of accessibility knowledge. Or if we are a customer service organization, let's train all our, front end staff on accessible customer service, for example. Changing policies and practices that create barriers. Again, this is a little bit more on that responsive. Oh, we noticed something here in our policy or in a practice that's creating a barrier. Now let's address it. And then certainly more responsive is, from simple accommodations like flexibility or having software or more time to more complex accommodations around medical or absence management. So this is where, we're really seeing this continuum of approaches, continuum of what's the best or what's the way that we can get to that proactive side? Well, we might start with changing a policy, knowing that we're moving as much as possible. We want to be as proactive as possible. Oh, great. So I love this because there's so many people in here with so much knowledge. So Megan just added a great resource in there around universal design for learning. Awesome. So I want to just share a little bit here again from the perspective of Clary, Andrew, and Sheila, because one of the ways, of course, we understand what kind of accessibility approaches or accommodations are needed is by understanding some of the barriers that people face. So I'll share this again, this short video.
Some of the barriers that I face as somebody with an invisible illness and an invisible disability specifically is being able to thrive in a variety of spaces. So, for example, going to the movie theaters. When I am at home, when I am working virtually or in person, I'm able to use a variety of accessibility tools. These tools allow me to have closed captions come up so that if I'm on a call or a virtual conversation, I can see closed captions to see exactly what folks are saying. Being dyslexic means that sometimes I miss what people are saying, or I don't understand the word, or I maybe am not hearing correctly to what is actually being said. Another barrier is intake forms. So when I go to a physio, for example, I have both things that I need to address physically, but I also have this intellectual disability here, learning disability. And when I have to fill out like a paper form and someone says, can you just do that real quick? Like, can you just like fill it out real fast? Like I can't fill it out fast because it takes me a bit longer to read through things, to process things, and it's not accessible. It ends up making me feel uncomfortable. I feel nervous. It causes anxiety. That's going to cause more stress and more issues. So one of those barriers being that when the forms, the intake forms aren't accessible, for me, that's definitely a barrier. Another one, and the last one I'll mention, is that when I'm doing something in the digital space, so that was like a physical example, having an intake form in person. But if somebody has this beautiful PDF and they want me to read through it, if it's not able to be read by a screen reader, for example, it creates a really inaccessible experience. It takes me so much longer to read through something than it does to hear it audibly. And it also creates an environment where I am now at a disadvantage when it comes to, say, being applying for a job or a call for speakers or something like that, because I have to now read it instead of using my talk to text tools. And it is something that really delays the process for me.
The barriers that I face in my day to day are different depending on the situation and the type of environment that I'm in. But there's a lot of different things that come up. One area that comes up a lot is in the healthcare system. As someone who has chronic illness and different medical conditions, it's something that comes up very frequently with appointments and trying to get places for different healthcare needs. And one of the parts about it is using a wheelchair and trying to access spaces that are not necessarily built for my mobility aids that I need to get around, but also the challenges that I've experienced with home care workers. And I have my own personal support workers that I hire now through a program, but there's always still those challenges of, are they going to be able to get here in a snowstorm? Am I going to be able to get out of bed? Am I going to be able to eat or take my medication? And I cannot do those things without another person to help me. So they're like really basic tasks and so essential.
Yeah, I do feel very frustrated with the barriers that I encounter. Like at my work, for example, sometimes with the other home care staff, I don't feel connected to them. I don't feel welcome. So sometimes when they have meetings and there's discussions happening and they're sharing with each other about their ideas for the work and what's happening and lots of other things, I'm left out and I feel very frustrated, especially if those things come up last minute. Or if there's a meeting maybe the next day and they don't book an interpreter, then I get canceled and I don't go. That's really frustrating. It feels like I'm forgotten about. And I don't know if they think that I can hear them, but I can't. So it causes a lot of misunderstandings, especially with certain words. So I've sat out at times, a few times, because of that. That's a really big frustration of mine.
So
So I'm just curious, what were some of the barriers that you noticed in that short video? So from Sheila, Clary, and Andrew's stories. Again, you can put that in the chat. Just what are you noticing as some of those accessibility barriers and access needs that they shared? So pop that in the chat. Yeah, Megan, a great one. Assumption that everyone can do forms. And also what makes them easier. Great. Anything else that folks noticed in terms of some of the barriers in those videos? Yeah, assuming everyone lives in a hearing world, people not being proactive with planning for accommodations, not preparing ahead of time to understand your audience. And those in-person intake forms and in-person meetings don't allow people the time and tools needed to complete or participate in them. Great. So feel free to keep adding things to the chat, and as they come in, I'll read some of them. But really appreciate just hearing or people sharing what they're noticing. Thank you. So we talked about the accessibility continuum and the definition of accessibility as being very proactive. And then the definition of an accommodation is on that responsive side, right? It's a responsive tool to adjust environments, services, and products to be able to be utilized or used by someone with a disability. And accommodations are really solutions that are the goal is to remove or reduce barriers in the environment for one person or a group of people. Generally, the onus to request accommodations is on the person with a disability. We know that often people may not ask for an accommodation because they don't know that they have a right to ask for it. And or they might fear some stigma or some judgment around disclosing a disability in a workplace, whether that's before they get hired, thinking, oh, I may not be hired, or whether that's once they're hired, thinking, oh, maybe I won't get a promotion, or maybe I won't get sort of the more meaningful role here. So that's why the proactive accommodation and proactive accessibility approaches that we've talked about are so important. So what are some accommodation examples? I mean, we've talked about more generally about accessible approaches. So some accommodation examples are things like assistive or adaptive technologies, such as speech to text, extra time during an interview to complete testing, flexible working arrangements, and that might be location or hours. Noise canceling headphones, sensory friendly environments. So those are just a few examples. And really the diversity of disabilities requires a diversity of accommodations, and they might be very specific to every individual. So even if we have kind of the most proactive workplace with proactive accessibility approaches, there will always be a need to provide accommodations to some people with disabilities. And so people with disabilities really have the right to request, to receive appropriate, flexible accommodations. And but as we're talking about accommodations, we're also talking about the goal of designing our spaces and services so they are accessible for the largest number of people as possible to really reduce the need for that focus on individual accommodations. So I'll just go through a few more examples here. So this list actually comes from the Accessibility Directorate. So I like the way that they've captured some of these in different categories. So policy and procedure changes, so modifying work hours, locations of duties, how tasks are expected to be completed. Supports, and this could differ from employment coaches, guide dogs, service animals, personal support workers, workplace attendant, or interpreters. Equipment, so technical devices like assistive technology, alternative work materials, communication aids, ergonomic workstations, things like that. And then structural modifications. So handrails, ramps, widened doorways, accessibility to common facilities, sensory modifications. None of the lists I'm including in this PowerPoint today are super extensive, but I will show you by the end of where you can learn more about accommodations and accessibility in general. So just to kind of take a closer look at a few different kinds of accommodations. Certainly flexible hours and work environments. As I said before, this is one of the biggest ways to address a whole range of disabilities and access needs. So this looks different for different people. It might be working from home, it might be part-time hours or split shifts, or scheduling work only at one location, for example. Written materials in alternative formats. So ensuring that documents, you're including things like, a larger font size, easy to read fonts, really accommodating employees who have low vision. And as I talked about before, accessible PDF formats for screen reader software. Written materials that also include photos will also make it easier for some employees who might be neurodivergent or have cognitive challenges to understand what is being described and using alternative text to describe images. And then, whoops, I skipped past that one. And then really paths of travel. So ensuring that all major pathways really pathways to key areas or functions of your workplace are clear of obstacles. And this can mean things like temporary backpacks or boxes of supplies, for example. So ensuring that, yes, there may be space and clear pathways more consistently as well. Okay, I do love that folks are asking questions in the chat, and that other people are answering those with resources. So that's really great. Standardized forms around requesting an accommodation, and Ursula put in some examples of some accommodation forms. Amazing. Love this community learning space. So one of the big myths in accommodation is that making accommodations for employees with disabilities is really complicated and expensive. And we know through some research done across Canada that, in fact, say that between 50 and 80% of suggested accommodations cost the employer less than $500. So if you think about being able to hire or retain diverse and really loyal talent, because there's also research to show that people with disabilities are really loyal and very dedicated uh, employees, then spending $500 or less for 50 to 80% of those folks really seems like a great investment. All right. So I guess that's kind of the what, right? The what are accommodations. So we covered the why. We want to cover the what, and now we want to kind of dive into the how. So how do we accommodate employees? And there's lots of different ways to do this. But kind of before we, part of the how, I guess, is to share again what are some of the accommodations that really work for Andrew, Clary, and Sheila.
It's so good when things actually are accessible. It allows me to not use all of what I call my creative potential, the way in which I navigate a world that is not set up and is not inclusive for folks like me with invisible illnesses and invisible disabilities. And when something is actually accessible, I'm able to thrive because I don't have to use all that extra creativity, all that extra energy in order to access something. So, for example, when something is accessible in that there's a PDF or that I can read with my screen reader, or I go into a space and I can tell that they've actually thought about things. One thing that is challenging for me is kind of knowing where to go and trying to, like be in that space and not be lost, not be confused. When you don't have to do all those things, I'm not anxious. I'm not feeling, like I'm feeling calm. You get to arrive at your space without having to have gone through all of those hoops in order to get there. You arrive in a space where you feel ready to engage in whatever you're doing, unlike feeling like tired, exhausted. So the real benefit is being able to access a space with ease and then use your creative potential, not to just survive in the space, but to thrive and do what you actually came here to do.
And it impacts my work too. I use a program called Dragon Naturally Speaking to type. It's a dictation program that allows me to use my voice to control my computer. And there's been periods this year where it's just stopped working at work, and I haven't been able to do my job. And I know that my people at work understand that, and they know that I need the software, and if it's not working, then I can't do my task. But at the same time, for me to know that there's this one barrier that is keeping me from doing my job that I want to do, I care about doing, and I care when I'm not able to do it. So it's getting that fixed as quickly as possible so that I can get back to it and do what I'm here to do.
So I would say about half the time it's more of the same, but the other half of the time I am thriving. And that's because I spoke up to my boss. If I needed something, then I asked for it. So I asked for a coworker to come with me some of the time when I'm with clients that I don't always feel safe around. Maybe because I can't hear them. So I've requested to have a coworker with me for safety reasons, for communication reasons. And so some clients have a really soft voice and I can't understand what they're saying, or if they have an appointment or other reasons, or if they need to make a phone call, then my coworker can come with me and make the phone call. And I feel more comfortable when I have that flexibility, for sure.
So again, you'll probably notice that I ask kind of similar
It's
questions each time, but what before I do this, I just want to ask again in chat, what do you notice that Holly, Clary, and Andrew shared about what are some of the accommodations that work for them, that allow them to thrive in their jobs? So again, pop those into the chat. So screen readers, and Jackie, it looks like you're asking a question based on the form. So um, maybe that's something we can try to bring forward at the end of this. Yeah, support from coworkers. So again, that's an accommodation and an accessibility approach to get that support, right? But there has to be, of course, leadership and managers willing to support a coworker in adding that extra time, right? Yeah, Jennifer, that's basically what I'm saying is having that colleague available for specific support sounds like a really practical and easy to kind of implement solution. Absolutely. So yeah, I think Andrew also talked about the program, Dragon Naturally Speaking, right? So without that software or that program, Andrew can't really do his job, right? So, um, oh yeah, good question. From Andrew's perspective, why just have one type of software available? Can there be two? And I do think this video is maybe 2 years old or so. And I do think that now, even in so for example, I'm a Mac user, but I can dictate to like to many different programs just through Mac. So when I, for example, had a brain injury, and for a number of months I couldn't look at a screen and I couldn't type, I use dictation tools on my phone and on my computer. So more and more, I think they are developing really resources that are part of our everyday technology and not a specific program. But really good question. Yeah, is there more than one type of adaptive technology or solution? That's a great question. So this is a bit overwhelming as a slide, I know. Um, I was just sort of, putting some of these again into kind of categories, right? So time and flexibility, more time to complete tasks, modifying hours of work, gradual return to work, extra time during an interview to complete testing, and then that should say flexible working arrangements and whether that's location or hours. Modifications, so modifying appropriate aspects, bundling duties, reallocating work duties within the work unit, changing an employee's place of work, searching for an alternate position, and then purchasing or modifying tools, equipment, and aids from noise canceling headphones, sensory friendly environments, and assistive technologies such as speech to text. So these are some of the areas that, yeah, Clary, Andrew, and Sheila all shared, where these are really supportive of their work. So I want to just kind of come back to this accessibility continuum. And I want you to think about, so I didn't put numbers in this, I should have, sorry. But if we think about the most proactive being one, so this creating safer, more inclusive workplaces, one, two, three being in the middle, proactively addressing barriers, four, and then five. Where would you say, like, where on this continuum, and you probably will be in a number of places, but where is your workplace, or where do you see your community kind of most of the time? Is there a really proactive approach? That would be a one. So just put a number in the chat. Is it somewhere in the middle? Are you still being very, not you and personally, but maybe the workplace, the system still being very responsive? Love seeing that one in there. So yeah, one, a two, a three, a four, or a five. Yeah, I love that. One and four. So we're creating safer, more inclusive workplaces and addressing barriers as they arise. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Yeah, workplace only. I mean, I'm kind of putting it out there generally in case people are joining this who don't have a particular workplace scenario, but could be community. So interesting to see this range, right? From one to five, and noticing also within this that you can be in multiple kind of these along the continuum at any one time. And again, what we're trying to do is to move to the proactive side, to the proactive approaches, and and then kind of how we do that. Oh, good to know you meant one, but I like that you put a five in there too. So, and so the how, I mean, there's many, I guess, different ways that we can talk about the how. But I like to kind of lay out these kind of accommodation steps, because sometimes we talk a lot about like the why and the what, and we don't always talk about, well, how do we do this, right? So first is to recognize the need for an accommodation. And so that's why understanding barriers, understanding access needs is such an important part of the process. Gathering relevant information, and assessing needs. So really talking about barriers, gathering information, discussing options. Number three, really making an informed decision. So reviewing the request, consulting any relevant parties when it's not, uh, sharing too much, and keeping things confidential, and really focusing on solutions. And then implementing the decision, right? So communicating what is the accommodation decision, and really this is about sharing this with the person who has requested the accommodation. There might be a need to share with broader team members, possibly, but that's not a given. And then really keeping records and following up. I feel like sometimes this is one of those afterthoughts, right? So documenting the accommodation process, even if it's an email, and following up and ensuring that there's ongoing, uh, sorry, I just saw that I need to plug my computer in, which I failed to do at the very beginning. So give me 1 second to do that. I was really focused on all the tech working, the videos, the PowerPoint, and didn't plug my computer in. So this is very high level, right? Accommodation steps. So we'll just kind of go through each one. Um, as I said before, when we're talking about responsive, generally the onus to request an accommodation is on the person with a disability. And often people may not ask for an accommodation, as we said, because they don't know that they have a right to it. A request does not have to be in writing. It can look like a conversation with a manager. Part of the request is really thinking about disclosure, as we've talked about. And a thing to be really clear about is that interviewers or managers in general, can't request a medical diagnosis. They also can't ask questions about an applicant's disability unless it relates specifically to how they would perform, or a certain job task. So applicants who disclose their disabilities before or during an interview, they might offer information about disability, accommodations, or barriers. The focus should not be on their diagnosis, the focus should be on barriers, access needs, how to remove the barriers, and how to really create a work space and environment that will allow, the person to thrive. And really, it should not be focused on their diagnosis. So gathering the relevant information and assessing needs. So this is step two. Really ensuring that employees or candidates understand their responsibilities. Talking with the employee about any of the barriers that they may face, including any accommodation that has been helpful in the past. Um, and an accommodation that was provided in a previous position or organization, because the person is going to know what accommodation is going to really support their work is the person with a disability. The focus again should be on finding an appropriate and efficient accommodation. And so that really means including that person who is to be accommodated, really including them as a central part of the conversation. And really determining with the employee whether they need a formal or short-term, more informal accommodation, such as like a temporary change in hours or of work or, alternate work location. And knowing that, so people who are part of this webinar today, you're coming from, the public sector, maybe the private sector, or the impact or nonprofit sector. So you might have specific processes within your work environment that say, no, no, these are the 3 steps you have to do. So I don't want to say that this is more general, kind of high level steps. And you may have a specific accommodation policy or process that you have to follow kind of within your workplace. So making an informed decision, this is really taking the time, right, to review the request, to understand the needs, and review any supporting documentation. Sometimes managers may ask, do you have any helpful resources that I could, use to learn more about some of the barriers you face? It could be that the employee or the candidate says, oh, by the way, here's a resource that, is very helpful to me. So this is about really understanding that and taking the time to kind of dialogue and ask questions about that. And then working with everyone that kind of needs to be involved, right? Beginning with the employee or the candidate. Does the manager need to be involved in the conversations to really determine, what possible accommodations might be integrated? Obviously, not every organization has a big budget for accessibility and accommodations, though I like to try to, I want to say, I guess, amplify the message that every organization should have a core budget around accessibility. So that, again, that is a proactive approach, is that you have a budget. Maybe it doesn't always get used, but there's a budget in place. So, cost-effective solutions, great. But what we want to do is find an accommodation that, or a solution that really respects the employee's dignity, privacy, confidentiality, comfort, and autonomy. So though, there's a lot of kind of big words, but really this is not an activity to kind of shame someone or to make them feel less than. It is an approach to build confidence, to build comfort and dignity. And document the process, even a summary email, right? So this is really important because just noting, oh, when did this start? What was it? Will help in that, ongoing kind of tracking and continuous improvement. So implementing the decision, of course, this is about, informing the individual. Hopefully they've been part of the discussion. So it's more of a, yes, we're going ahead with this versus a, okay, here's the accommodation, how and when it will be implemented. Um, Advising the individual of the rationale for not providing accommodation if it cannot be provided. And again, employers have a duty to accommodate up to a point of undue hardship. And um, that's not always clear, right, to employers or employees. Consult the individual about the best approach to explaining the accommodation to anyone affected, if necessary. Informing others as needed and agreed upon in a timely manner. Sometimes it might be really helpful to share, yeah, like we all have different things that work for us at work, um, and have a broader conversation about what are some of those things so that other team members don't feel someone is getting, special treatment, time off for medical appointments or time off for or the ability to, flexibly work from home a few days a week when others can't. It's really important to, again, very proactively address where, bias or judgment might be coming in. And ensuring that you and the individual are aware of all available resources. So if the employee disagrees with the decision, like discussing it, but also, is there an appeal process? Is there a place within the workplace where people can learn more about an accessibility plan or an accommodations policy. So that's really, really key. And then the last step, of course, is documenting and following up. So this idea that managers, leaders really need to respect the dignity and the privacy of the person being accommodated, and communication with others should be really limited to those who need to know and kind of what they need to know. Records should document the process and be kept private and confidential, and that regular follow-up and modification if required. Um, for example, I'll just use myself. Again, when I had a brain injury, there were certain things I needed in the initial part of that, like dictation tools, like no screen time. But as I recovered from the brain injury, I was able to do some different things. I still have some of the symptoms that are episodic now. So I might need something one day, but I don't need it the next day, for example. So really ensuring that this is really about an ongoing kind of conversation and dialogue, and making sure to integrate accommodation needs into future and current human resources and business planning. So I love this idea. Someone shared this idea that, you've hired someone, you're onboarding them. And one of the ways that you can ask what they need, you don't have to even talk about barriers, you don't have to talk about access needs, but you simply ask, what do you need to thrive at work? Or what do you need to really succeed in this position? And opening up the dialogue, again, not just at onboarding, because people's needs may change, but keeping that open dialogue and discussion as a manager, kind of multiple points through someone's employment journey is really, really key. So I want to just stop for a moment because after this, I have a couple more things, but it sort of shifts the conversation to more of the kind of how to support disclosure. So I just want to stop here and see if anyone has any questions. So I know you can put those in the chat. I see a comment around someone saying so important around we used to ask apprentices for medical documentation, but made an intentional decision to do away with that. Sometimes there might still be a need for medical documentation, but it certainly I don't think uh, often there's a third party like a health insurer that might get that documentation and not the workplace itself. Um, yeah, so any other questions that people have at this point? I see there is a Q&A. You can put it in the chat, you can add it to the Q&A. And so someone asks, how do you ask for an accommodation? Um, so very good question. Again, if there's more proactive approaches in your workplace, ideally, you don't have to ask for an accommodation. You're just saying, oh, well, are there noise canceling headphones available, or could I bring my own in if I need them? And you can maybe witness or see examples of that in your workplace. Um, there is, as I said, every employer has a duty to accommodate. So it's really up to you as an individual when you ask. Do you ask before you get a job? Maybe because you know that it's really important for you to have dictation tools and you can't do the job without it. So you want to share that at the time of an interview. You might ask when you're onboarding. You might ask later in your journey if, again, for example, I'll use myself, I'm a late diagnosis ADHD. And so I didn't even know that there were kind of things that were coming up or barriers until the point of diagnosis. And then I went, oh, wow, okay. I do find interruptions hard at work. I do need to collaborate more. I'm an oral processor, so I need to often share verbally what I'm thinking to be able to get to a decision, for example. And these are things that are connected to my ADHD and being neurodivergent. So, curious if anyone else would have, curious, yeah, if anyone else would add anything to answer that question. I know you can't come off mute, but adding things in the chat. And I see, how much disclosure in terms of details is necessary to ensure it's not a bare your soul type of sharing for staff on one's accommodation. Yeah, and I think this is what I'm really trying to make a clear distinction about today. You're not sharing a medical diagnosis. You don't have to share even a disability disclosure. What's important to share is what are some barriers you might have? What are some access needs? And what will help you succeed in your job? If someone asks you for a diagnosis, again, you can say, well, I really don't think that needs to be the focus here, unless you want to share more about that. But even if I shared I have ADHD, there are so many different symptoms of ADHD and people experience it so differently. That's not going to help a manager. What I need to share is the things that will help me succeed, which might be very different from someone else with ADHD. So I think that is the key. The key is really, what are you disclosing? When are you disclosing it? Because there is a disclosure dilemma, right? The disclosure dilemma, as I talked about around, um, what are it's challenging sometimes to disclose. Again, I'll use myself as an example. In 2022, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. It's taken me a few years to actually feel comfortable talking about that. If I was in a workplace, I would not have brought that up. That has to do with stigma, that has to do with discrimination, and feeling like, oh no, if I told someone that, maybe they would think, oh, I couldn't be in front of a room. That's not my anxiety. I don't struggle with that at all. Um, and so it's that's where it's really up to the person to really decide what's important to share to ensure that you can succeed at your job. And don't share any more than you have to or want to around that. Because it's not a legal requirement. Um, However, I say that which with so much awareness that in some workplaces that have sort of mandated people back to work, there's a real struggle because flexibility is such an important accessibility approach. And what I've heard is that, yeah, people do have to provide a medical letter saying that they need that accommodation. So again, this is generalized information across a range of workplaces, and I wish it didn't have to be so challenging to get some of the things that are so necessary for people. Any other so I see another one here. Can an employer indicate that accommodation needs to be assessed, ongoing, and can be withdrawn, even though medical indicates the disability is not going away? Jeff, are you still on the line? Because I feel like
Yeah.
this gets more into that sort of, duty to accommodate. Is there, do you have a response to this, or could you point someone to where they might access more information on that?
Yeah, let me respond in the chat. I'll just have to do a bit of searching just to find the right place to send folks.
Okay, that
Thanks,
sounds
Corey.
great. Yeah. Um, I think like I would want an accommodation not so much to be assessed in an ongoing way, but to be kind of monitored, right? But so that it's working for the employee. I think the idea is, accommodations are about supporting success, supporting someone to do the work to the best of their ability. So I would hope that certainly it wouldn't be held over someone in terms of, oh no, we're going to take this accommodation away. Um,
Hey,
yeah,
Corey,
yeah,
it's Jeff here in the background. I think sometimes there's boilerplate language around accommodations to ensure that there is an expectation that folks will follow up and ensure that the tools are still working. Or is
yeah,
there anything
yeah,
in addition to what is already working for you that could be more helpful?
yeah,
I'm with you in thinking that it might be more of a positive sort of check-in point rather than a threat. I certainly wouldn't hope that that would be the case.
yeah. Yeah, so Tammy, you're sharing some information here. I have a disability that is visible. I cannot hide it, and some interviewers make assumptions knowing I have a visible disability. Absolutely. So those assumptions are really part of what ableism is, right? The description and ableism, as we know, is very real and exists, and that's really, judgments and assumptions that people make about someone with a disability. So absolutely, not to deny that that doesn't exist. Um, and this is why the proactive approaches are so important to train people to ensure that, spaces are accessible so that we reduce discrimination, we reduce assumptions and biases and judgments based on kind of one characteristic or one part of who someone is. So I want to share just a couple again of short videos. So this work was done actually in combination with some public sector employees and the directorate. And we built a bit of a script around maybe what not to do when if someone discloses to you sort of as a manager or a leader, and then what to do. But I want to say before we took this script and a colleague and I recorded it. And what I want to say is the first one is a bit cringeworthy, but I think what we learned through the process of creating this is that many people have experienced this kind of reaction from a manager or leader. So I just want to share this. There is ASL and closed captions in this video. So let me just go to the full screen here. Here we go. Oh, hi, Sacred. So good to see you. Thanks for, reaching out to me. It's been a busy day, so, hopefully we can make this quick.
Yeah, so I wanted to meet to talk about something that's been coming up for me at work and kind of impacting my ability to perform my job task. I feel like I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD, something I've suspected for a while.
Oh my God, my nephew has ADHD. Smart kid, but wow, he has a hard time focusing and keeps changing his direction in life. I guess it kind of makes sense that you have it too. I've kind of noticed you're all over the place sometimes.
Oh, okay, I didn't know it was so apparent.
Well, some of us have noticed, like, are you on medication? Let me connect you with another team member who also has ADHD. I don't know if you know, but their meds made a big difference for them. And, I do have to hop on another call. Like, thanks so much for, coming by today. Thanks for telling me and we'll figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
So, lots of things not to do. Do you want anyone want to put a few things that you again noticed in that video? What really didn't go so well there? Way to jump in and take over that conversation. Absolutely. Yeah. Dismissive attitude, stereotyping and using a family reference, rushing the conversation, absolutely. Bringing in a team member's diagnosis. So again, not confidential or private. The manager was not listening and talking about her family. Yeah. Yeah. So many things not to do. So now I want to share, again, this isn't perfect. We may do things in many different ways, but at least this one is getting a little closer to maybe what might be a more appropriate and dignified response. So again, I'll just make sure I'm in the right mode here. Oh, hi, Sigrid. Thanks for joining me and, for reaching out to chat. It's been a really busy day. Hopefully we can make this quick.
Yeah, no, I can be quick. So I wanted to meet to talk about something that's coming up for me at work, and I feel like it's impacting my ability to perform my job task. I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD, something I've kind of been suspecting for a while.
Oh, wow. Thanks so much for sharing with me. It must be a little bit overwhelming to get this diagnosis. Like, I just want to let you know our conversation is confidential. I won't be sharing with anyone else on the team unless I need to in order to support you, and we would talk about that. But can you please give me a minute just to let my next meeting folks know that I might be a little late?
Yeah, no problem. I was a bit concerned about sharing this with you, and I'm not really sure how to share this more broadly with the team.
Well, let's start with understanding more. What barriers are you experiencing? Like what would you say how would you say these barriers are affecting you at work?
Well, I'm kind of noticing that I'm feeling fairly overwhelmed. I'm having a hard time focusing and multitasking. It's taking me longer to meet some of my deadlines as a result.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry you've been feeling overwhelmed. What do you think could support you?
More time, quieter space, more one-on-one support, EAP or maybe something beyond. And beyond that, I'm not really sure what's possible.
Well, I mean, I have to say all of that sounds doable within your current job. And a corner cubicle actually just opened up last week, and I was just looking to move someone into it. So why don't I do a bit of research, connect with HR, find out all of the supports available. And, also just to be clear, I will never ask you about your diagnosis, and you don't have to share that with anyone outside of health professionals. Like, I just need to know the barriers you experience as a result of your disability, but also what kind of supports you would really help you to thrive at work. And I'll follow up with an email and summarize everything we've talked about. I do have to run to my next meeting, but should we follow up in a couple of weeks? Just, once some of these accommodations are in place. And I guess if you have any research or educational materials to point me to, I would be happy to educate myself more.
Thanks so much. It's really a relief to have this conversation. I'll share some video links with you that I found really helpful for myself.
Amazing. All right. Thanks, Sacred, and we'll connect soon.
Sounds good.
So not necessarily perfect, right? At the beginning I said, "Oh, this must be overwhelming," instead of saying, "Oh, how has this kind of landed for you?" Right? So, but definitely, what did you notice in that video that was different or that was, maybe more along the right lines? Yeah, more concrete actions about next steps. I allowed her to talk. Sure. Listening, active listening. Isn't that amazing? Um, this makes me sad for the experience I had versus how validating it could have been. And Annie, all I want to say is in the development of this workshop, dozens of people were involved, and that was a very common story. Assurance of confidentiality, curiosity of impact of job performance, offer to research and recommend supports, offer to follow up. Confirmed what I heard and summarized the situation. Yeah, great. So there's just really thinking about, I mean, from the perspective of how to disclose, how to ask for an accommodation, what is an important to share, and what you don't need to share. Then really thinking also as a leader, as a manager, how to create that safer space for someone to share. Active listening, summarizing, really focusing on letting the person know it's confidential, um, following up, documenting. Some of those steps are just so important in the process. And as we're, hearing from folks in this webinar today, that's not the experience that everyone is having. Um, I've seen, so another question, I guess, in the Q&A is, what are your thoughts on formal accommodations being handled by an absence management contractor? And I have to say, this is not my area of expertise. I wonder if, again, kind of throwing it out there to this group, does anyone have any good resources or potential responses to this? I have a very small workplace, and so we don't have that kind of, I want to say, support or that kind of role. And but I know it exists in certainly in the public sector and in other larger organizations. So it'd be really open to someone sharing if they have had that kind of experience. Yeah, third party is often impersonal in general. Absolutely. And I think that can be really challenging, especially when we're trying to build that safer space. It's hard to do that when there is maybe a lack of trust.
Corey, one thing I'd say is that sometimes and maybe oftentimes a request for an accommodation needn't always go through a medicalized process, whereas this
Mhm.
third party can often be your health benefits provider or that sort of thing. I think being able to have conversations with managers and for managers and supervisors to have the autonomy and support to accommodate and support their employees. As you've talked about, there's not often big expense associated with changing the way something's done or making slight adjustments. And so I would say, regardless of whether it's a third party or not, if you can engage your manager in that discussion, I think that that might often be, a way forward rather than having to go through a medicalized process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's really, in essence, what we're trying to share here is that continuum, is that, all of the proactive approaches and ideally being able to, for managers and leaders also to have the skills and kind of I guess the power or the influence to be able to implement things that might be uh, more proactive or more sort of informal, for lack of a better word. So yeah, thanks for that. So I guess the next thing I want to share is just where to where to maybe get more information. And so I'm coming from one perspective. Of course, you can get a whole lot more information from the Human Rights Commission, from the Accessibility Directorate. Those are two really, really wonderful resources. And what I want to share now is just where you can find more about the ACE project. So we've just launched a new web home for the ACE project. So it's called theaceproject.ca. And there's the team that works on the ACE project. Um, we have, I guess, two things that I want to really show you today. So the Resource Hub and ACE training are really two areas where you can find a lot more information. And we have some information here around, who we're reaching with this work, which is kind of interesting. But the resource hub, when you click on this, what it takes you to is this is a searchable resource hub focusing on accessibility training, resources, funding, tip sheets, and guidebooks. So you can filter by category. You want a checklist, or you want a link or a video or a tip sheet. You can filter by language, English, French, ASL. You can filter by topic. So for example, let's filter by topic, accommodations. What we're going to see here is a range of things that the ACE project has created, but also other great resources out there. The Job Accommodation Network, JAN, really is a leading resource around accommodation. um, Newcomers Disability Toolkit. And then there's a range of videos here from people we've interviewed talking about their accommodations, and all have given permission for these videos to be used in the capacity of learning and capacity building. Um, the Human Rights Commission has the Working with Abilities training, for example, and I'll just load the rest. Accessible teaching and learning. I think someone put that in the text or in the chat earlier. That's really coming from more of a post-secondary perspective. Accessibility in Nova Scotia. So this is a website with a lot more resources from the directorate. Um, and so on and so on. So, here's an accessible recruitment and hiring tip sheet. I do believe we also have an accommodations tip sheet. So you can, again, search by topic, search by language, search by category. So if I search, for example, by tip sheets, this is where I'd see, okay, I think we have an accommodations at work tip sheet. Yes, we do. Here it is. We also have one on plain language, digital communication. So this is a really great place to identify resources. If you have a resource and you want us to include it, please reach out via our contact link here. And then the other thing is ACE training. So we do offer all of this training for free because we've received funding from both federal and provincial governments to do so. Our on-demand training, we've just launched additional trainings here. So we have some equity-focused trainings from interrupting unconscious bias, intersectionality, disrupting ableism, and allyship, to accessibility focused ones, everything from neuro-inclusion to accessible retention and career development, accessible communications, inclusive recruitment and hiring, and accessibility foundation. So all of these are available for free on demand. Many of these trainings were developed in collaboration with the accessibility development, with the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism, for example, for the unconscious bias training. And by January, all of the trainings will have ASL videos. Right now, about 70% of the trainings have those. And by January, all will have ASL videos. In addition, through the ACE project, we also offer some skill builders. So these are from this fall, but we typically offer a monthly synchronous. So we come together over Zoom, similar to this kind of skill builder. And then we also have some self-paced online cohorts. So while this one still says October 2025, we actually pushed it to February 2026. And this is, organization-wide accessibility. So how do you take accessibility from one person's job in an organization to everyone integrating accessibility kind of across their roles? So these are just some of the ways that you can access additional resources. I think so. I'll just stop sharing there. I know there was another question in here. So So I'll just, I guess, read a couple of the comments, and I know we have about 5 minutes for any additional questions. One of the comments was HR and managers need to fully understand equity versus equality. Really great comment. Absolutely. That is foundational to the work. And it's really why, even though we're funded to talk about and increase capacity around accessibility, two of our first trainings were Accessibility Foundation and Allyship Foundation, because without understanding some of those key concepts, equity versus equality, it's really hard to implement really good accessibility work. Melanie saying, I have not had a good experience with absence management and confidentiality in the workplace, even though the disability did not result in absences, and impersonal and imposed restrictions without any accommodation to duties, additional duties added, and no accommodation for that. I'm really sorry to hear that, Melanie. I think we have a lot of work to do in the world and also in workplaces around accommodating. Absolutely. Um, that's it, unfortunately, more and more people, I don't know about more and more, but unfortunately, a lot of people do have not great experiences when sharing their disclosing that they have access needs, and then that kind of going through the process. So I'm sorry to hear that you've had a really negative experience. I don't know if your organization has any kind of appeal process, or if there's a way to kind of understand more about what's possible in terms of advocacy or advocating for yourself. Jeff, I just want to swing back to you. I know we only have a couple of minutes. Were you able to find any information that I know you said you might take the time to do that and get back to someone. So just wanted to kind of close the loop on that.
No, I did not, but I have the email address of the individual. So if I'm able to turn something up specifically beyond, the kind of language around revisiting accommodations or assessing them, sometimes just being standardized language and depending upon their experience as to whether or not that assessment resulted in, the retraction of an accommodation, I think that would be potentially something that they could reach out to the Human Rights Commission about if, their circumstances didn't change, their needs didn't change, but the accommodation was denied after already being provided. I think that would be something to discuss on an individual basis.
Yeah. And so one of the things that is in the employment standard recommendations, and I know Jeff, you were on that committee, is the idea of really suggesting that workplaces create accommodation policies. Because what we want to avoid is having managers or leaders, maybe they're really, really great at active listening and follow up and follow through and being really confidential, but maybe that manager leaves and the next person doesn't take that same approach. So having an accommodations policy, and again, training and resources around that is one way to really ensure that there's a consistent approach across an organization. And I think we will see more and more of that developed. And that's kind of the key to the standards as well. When those standards are enacted, it means that more workplaces are following more accessibility best practice, and we're not just leaving it up to chance. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Jeff, for the invitation to share some of this. Thanks to all the folks in the session for being really engaged and often answering questions when I couldn't. I know there's a lot of, when I saw the list of who was coming, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of people here who know a lot more than me. So really appreciate just how engaged everyone has been.
You're so humble, Corey. Thank you for the presentation and for sharing all the incredible resources that have been developed under the ACE project. I think that what is there as a beginning resource hub is exactly what the employment standard lays out as being needed, is for organizations and individuals to have a centralized spot with resources to help support their organizational journey towards removing barriers to inclusion. So I hope that folks on the call and those who view the recording afterwards are able to search out that the aceproject.ca and find and share those resources within their organizations and to take some of that self-paced training. There's just so much good stuff there, Corey. So thank you again for taking this chance to share a bit about the work that you're doing. We really appreciate you. And for the rest of the attendees, thank you for sticking it out. It's been a very consistent group of folks throughout the duration of the session, Corey. So you're very engaging, and you kept them engaged and interested. There's several other sessions taking place during Nova Scotia Human Rights Week. So if you haven't already registered for the remainder of the week's events, you can go to humanrights.novascotia.ca to register for more webinars. And then we'll have the Nova Scotia Human Rights Awards presentation in person and live streamed from the Halifax Central Library on Wednesday, December the 10th in the afternoon. So encourage folks to come out and celebrate with us on International Human Rights Day. And Corey, thanks again so much for sharing with us. And thanks as well to our interpreters, Sydney and May. Have a great day, everyone.